All right, guys, welcome to Falcon Central Radio, part of the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. Today, stepping in for my usual co-host, Scott Karasik, is Ben Albright. He's an NFL insider. You can check him out at Mile High Sports. He's also on the radio out of Denver, AM 1340. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, today we're going to talk all about the draft. We'll get Ben's thoughts on the top of the draft. I know this is a Falcon show. We might touch upon the Falcons a little later, but the more intriguing storylines, I think, are at the top of the draft, where we're all going to be buzzing Thursday night, 2 weeks from now. Ben, let's start things off by talking about sort of now we are entering this last 2 week period headed into the draft. This is basically smokescreen season. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah. This is the time where NFL teams try to drop, quote-unquote, fake bombs so that people zig instead of zag and, don't know what they're doing and that kind of stuff. The lying season is in full effect.
And I'm curious sort of your thoughts on sort of with the recent talk over the last couple of days with the number one pick with the Cleveland Browns, discussion that, it seemed like for a couple of weeks now, everybody was sort of settling in on Sam Darnold being the prohibitive favorite to be that number one pick. But now in the last couple of days, there's been a huge surge for Josh Allen to possibly be that pick. I'm curious. It's interesting because at least in the case of Allen, you heard some rumors earlier in the offseason that John Dorsey was a big fan of Josh Allen. But I'm sort of curious, what is your take on the whole Allen versus Darnold, and if you have any thoughts on who the Browns will ultimately land with that number one overall pick?
I've been told since January that it was Sam Darnold. So if that's changed, or if an interview has changed, or they've just changed their minds, that would be something that came along. But I can't see any scenario in which you take Josh Allen number one. It just doesn't make any sense. You look at the tape, and he's very clearly not one of the top three quarterbacks in this class. I would say that, I would struggle to say that he's one of the 50 best players in this draft. So taking him number one would be ludicrous, for being honest. He's a guy that's, he has some tools, and if you can ever get all of those tools that he has, married up and turn him from a thrower into a quarterback, he might be something, but history shows us that those guys tend not to succeed. They tend to bust out. And, the idea that you need a bazooka arm on a quarterback as a primary attribute is really antiquated thinking. The modern NFL game is played between 5 and 11 yards from the line of scrimmage. It's where 85% of the passing is. So the idea that you need somebody that's just going to throw the ball 60 yards down the field when you don't do that anymore, you don't line up in the I formation, is really weird.
I do want to dial down a little bit on that whole idea of Josh Allen having that upside with the big arm and the size. And you mentioned sort of that antiquated notion. It is odd to me, sort of, given the modern era of the NFL, that we sort of still focus on this idea that, if you can, quote unquote, make all the throws with that sort of howitzer arm, that makes you a better candidate than, say, other quarterbacks that are much better at processing information. I'm curious, sort of, what are your thoughts on that, and maybe one of the reasons why, you think, why are people still latched on to this whole Josh Allen, in his tremendous upside discussion?
I think it's a byproduct, like I said, of that antiquated thinking, and I think that, if something gets said enough, it becomes truth, whether it's true or not. For instance, let's do this. If you had to guess, how many 40-plus yard completions did Josh Allen have this year at Wyoming? Just take a guess.
12.
The answer is 1. He had 1. So the idea that having a huge arm like that is ridiculous. Yeah, it's a plus attribute, but you can't base your whole evaluation around a plus attribute. It'd be like basing a whole evaluation of a guy around his mobility, whether he could throw or not. So, give me the guy who can process the fields quickly over the guy with the size and the plus attribute. Give me the core attribute over the plus attribute. I would take Chad Pennington over Byron Leftwich every day of the year.
Fair enough. Discussing these quarterbacks, I know you've been public with sort of your affinity for Baker Mayfield. Sort of where do you see Baker Mayfield fitting in with some of these other guys like a Sam Darnold and a Josh Rosen?
Well, I think Baker's the quicker processor of all the quarterbacks in this class. He does have a strong arm. He's 57 miles an hour on the gun at the combine. That's pretty high, believe it or not. That's getting up there. So these people that say that he doesn't have the arm strength or whatever, they just flat out don't know what they're talking about. So he had more velocity than Rosen. Darnold didn't throw, so we don't have a number on him. But Baker was basically the second strongest arm at the combine, which is what it is. So if you value the ability if you recognize that the NFL threshold for velocity is about 55 miles an hour, and that's what you need to be effective in the league, and he meets that checkbox, and then you go around and you look at the other attributes. Okay, so he can perform physically at that level. Now, does he perform mentally? Darnold, a lot of turnovers. He's a young guy. He's still trying to learn. But there are some questions about that. A lot of turnovers. So whether or not he matures. Rosen, a guy who couldn't seem to carry his team. We talk about a weak team around him. That's fine. We talk about a lot of things, but at no point did he ever put the team on his back and carry him, and that's concerning for a position of leadership. We saw Baker Mayfield carry the team. We saw Baker Mayfield do it against great defenses. We saw Baker Mayfield go through and make the quick decisions and the quick reads and all that kind of stuff. Does everything he did in college translate? No, not exactly. But, the things that do translate show a very, very good quarterback prospect. And the things that people get hung up on are things that they don't really know about. His character, you saw him run for the cops when he was drunk. Everybody's made a mistake when they were a kid. But it's not a pattern. You start to look at the on-field stuff, the grabbing his junk at an opponent or planting a flag. It's just silly sportsmanship stuff. And I can promise you that no coach out there has any, cares one iota about anything about any of that kind of stuff. So these quote-unquote character concerns with Baker Mayfield are really just people projecting where they missed in the Johnny Manziel evaluation onto Baker Mayfield, because there are some similarities with upbringing, both come from wealthy families, that kind of thing, and are brash, outspoken, played in Texas, that kind of stuff. So, I think that people fall into these traps. Well, Baker Mayfield's too small. He's the same size as Case Keenum, only thicker in frame. Or his character concerns. Well, what character concerns? You've never been in the same room with the guy. How do you know what character concerns he has? I think people fall into these traps, of repeating things that they see rather than doing the actual legwork.
Now, since basically the end of the regular season, you've sort of been every now and then sort of projecting where you think the quarterbacks were going to go, and earlier in this offseason, the big part of that was sort of figuring out who was going to land Kirk Cousins, whether it was going to be Denver, whether it was going to be Minnesota. Obviously, ultimately, he went to Minnesota. Denver grabbed Case Keenum. I'm curious, maybe from what you're hearing, if you could do the same for these top 4 or 5 quarterbacks in this draft. Obviously, you mentioned Darnold going to Cleveland. Do you feel like there's a strong indicator that specific teams like specific quarterbacks and will do what they can to get those guys?
I think teams are going to keep jockeying to try to get the guys they want. Like I said, I think Darnold is probably the guy at number 1. I had heard that Allen was plan B. I don't know that he's in serious contention there at number 1. We'll have to see. If you look at number 2, I know I saw some report today about the Giants not liking Josh Rosen. That's blatantly false. I don't know where that came from, but that's totally false. The Jets are probably settling in on Rosen or Baker Mayfield. They have some love for Josh Allen too. I just don't think they would go Sam Darnold. And then you go down the list. Buffalo. They're just hoping to get up there and get one of these guys. Arizona really loves Josh Allen, but they can't get up and get him. New England really loves Josh Rosen. They can't get up and get him. So there's there are other teams in play. Miami really loves Baker Mayfield. They can't seem to get up and get him. So there are teams that are in play for these guys, and it's just a question of how it shakes out from the top down. Everybody's going to be reactive to that first pick, and that's really going to kind of shake this thing out.
And coming off the heels of that first pick, with the Giants sort of being the next domino to fall, are they in a position where they're going to take the heir apparent to Eli Manning, or are they going to be in a situation where they go for the best position player, whether that's a Saquon Barkley, whether that's a Bradley Chubb, somebody else that can help them win now? Do you have any insights into maybe the direction that they're leaning?
I think it's going to be Bradley Chubb at number 2. It could be a quarterback. They could trade back, but as of right now, Chubb's the number 1 player on the board. I think that's the direction they're going to go. I think that the Giants keep leaking that they like Sam Darnold to make sure that the Browns take him at number 1 instead of Chubb, because the Browns would ideally like to go Darnold at 1, Chubb at 4, but Chubb's not going to be there if the Giants take him. So what you see your teams trying to play mental games with each other, in figuring this thing out. So the Giants, like I said, they're hoping that the Browns take Sam Darnold or even Josh Allen, number 1 overall, and you'll see the Giants leak out "quote unquote" interest in Josh Allen too, just to kind of keep the pressure on, so that the Browns feel like they have to get their quarterback at 1 and drop Chubb right in their lap at 2. I don't think Saquon Barkley's really in play there. Maybe he is, but I not based on what I've heard. Based on what I've heard, Saquon Barkley's most likely landing spot is going to wind up being Tampa. He may go to Cleveland at 4, like he's in the mix there. But other than that, there's nobody really in the top 8 that's just enamored with Saquon Barkley. And I think these teams all recognize 2 things. One, that outside of punter and kicker, running back is the lowest impact position in terms of expected points added per play on the field. And 2, that drafting a running back in the top 10 is a huge mistake in terms of value in a deep class. People talk about Todd Gurley or Leonard Fournette or Ezekiel Elliott. Well, Todd Gurley was nothing until they turned around and, the past year, and then they turn around and get a new coaching staff in there and energize it. All of a sudden, he's something again when they heavily invest in the offensive line. Leonard Fournette, the Jacksonville Jaguars were 7-6 with him in the lineup and 3-0 with him out of the lineup. And then you look at Ezekiel Elliott. Well, Darren McFadden was number 2 in the NFL rushing the year before behind that offensive line, and then you just plugged Elliott in there. How much of that is a byproduct of having a great line? So the idea that investing in a running back, even the ones that look like success stories on the surface that early, is just a mistake, and most teams are smart enough to know not to do it.
Now, I'm curious, now that you say that, looking at a team like Denver, who you hear a lot about in your neck of the woods, sort of what is their plan? Are they hoping one of these quarterbacks slides to 5? Are they sort of settling in on, if they're not going to take a guy like Barkley, are they looking at a guy like Quentin Nelson or something like that with their top pick?
I think Quentin Nelson's certainly in play. I think he's certainly in play. I think the way the Broncos are looking at this is a situation where they're trying to sit in the catbird seat and see what falls in their lap. With all these teams trying to scramble over each other to get quarterbacks, maybe Chubb falls in their lap, maybe Quentin Nelson. Quentin Nelson would really shore up an offensive line that's been an Achilles heel for Denver for years. You look at the line right now. They had Garrett Bowles at left tackle last year. Ron Leary's going to make the move from right guard to left guard. Matt Paradis is an all-pro center. They've got a gaping hole at right guard right now with nobody really there but Connor McGovern. And then you turn around and look at the right tackle. They just signed Jared Valdir. So all of a sudden, the offensive line, which has been a liability for the past couple of years, could be a position of strength if you added a Quentin Nelson. But like I said, I think they're just looking at this as being in the catbird seat, seeing what falls to that position. And if another team is willing to trade up, for instance, Buffalo, they could get 2 picks, get themselves maybe a corner at that first Buffalo pick, and then get guard Will Hernandez with the second one.
Now, you mentioned Buffalo trading up. You also mentioned New England trading up as well. Is it serious that now that New England has 2 first-round picks that they're going to be looking to move up, or is this an instance where Bill Belichick is going to zig while everybody expects him to zag?
I think they're exploring all their options. They want to see what they're able to do, what puts them in the best position. They know they have a lot of holes to fill on defense, so staying put could be a boon, but they also have their eyes on a couple of players that are going to be available at the top of the draft and, seeing if they can get them. So I think they'll just explore all their options.
Now, most people talk about the top 4 quarterbacks in Rosen, Darnold, Baker Mayfield, and Allen in some order. I'm curious sort of your thoughts on Lamar Jackson sort of being, I guess, the 5th wheel in that equation, and sort of given some of his upside, given some of his abilities, but for whatever reason isn't necessarily considered on the level of the other top four quarterbacks by most people. Does it seem like Lamar Jackson, considering where he's going to get picked, if he's not a top 10 selection, if he slides into the middle of the first round, the late first round, or even in the second round, as some people think he will, is he going to wind up being a steal, even though he may not be the most polished quarterback? But considering the relative value of him, will he be one of the bigger steals that we look back years from now and saying, how did he fall that far in the draft?
I don't personally think so. And to be honest with you, I think he's going to go in the first round. I think he's going to go to the Chargers, but we'll see how that shakes out. I don't think, I know he's not going to go in the top 10. I'll tell you that now. But he could go to Los Angeles Chargers. I don't think he is. I'm not a big Lamar guy. I know everybody on the internet, Twitter and stuff are really big on him. If you watch, the offense that he comes out of, while complex in verbiage and ostensibly a pro-style offense, is actually very simple. Makes very simple reads and very simple throws. A lot of mesh concept, pick play type stuff, shallow crosser, stuff like that. You don't even chart if you're scouting a quarterback. It's just so easy. You don't even bother charting it. So. Quarterbacks that come out of the Bobby Petrino offense usually struggle in the NFL because Bobby makes all the protection calls, Bobby makes all the adjustments, and he sets the quarterback up to just basically be a point guard. Go out there, deliver the football to the receiver, let them make the play. We look back at the career of Bobby Petrino, the quarterbacks that he's had, and Tyler Wilson, Ryan Mallett, Brian Brom, guys like that didn't really succeed in the NFL. The quarterbacks that he's had haven't really succeeded or had long-term success in the NFL. His most accomplished protege is probably Chris Redman. Falcons fans should be familiar with him.
Okay, there you go. Now, Ben, I am curious about maybe if you have any thoughts on what the Falcons might do at the back end of the first round. Everybody seems to be expecting them to go D-tackle with that first pick, whether they trade up to get their guy or whether they sit there at 26 to get their guy. Is there any sort of things that you're hearing about how these D-tackles are viewed? You have guys like Maurice Hurst, who's with the heart condition. He's gotten cleared by his doctors, but whether or not that means NFL teams are going to clear him, who knows? You got Vita Vea, who's been compared to Dontari Poe as this massive freak. You got guys like Deron Payne and Taven Bryan. Any thoughts on some of these D tackles at the top of the draft what the Falcons may be targeting?
Well, I think they really like Vita. I don't know if they're going to be able to get him, but I think they would really like him. I think he fits. He's a great scheme fit. I think he's a guy who could be hyper-productive and makes the guys around him hyper-productive. Like I said, I just don't know that he's going to be there. They might have to be aggressive to get up and get him. Now, we have seen the Falcons with Thomas Dimitroff, be aggressive in going after guys that they want. That's certainly not an issue. So I would expect if the Falcons really like a guy, they'll make a move to go get him.
Okay. Any thoughts on sort of the Matt Ryan contract extension stuff? It seems like some people in the media seem to be making this sort of impasse between Matt Ryan and the Falcons to be bigger than what it is. I personally don't put a whole lot of stock into it. It'll get done when it gets done. But I'm curious sort of maybe things that you've heard about this whole situation.
Yeah, I think they're blowing up nothing, and the media does that. It's that season where you don't have a lot to write about, and that's free cookies. You know what I mean? That's a freebie. As long as the contract situation is not done, you can just keep writing columns and spending article inches and paying off radio segments by saying, "Well, it's not done. Here's why." Like I said, it's a freebie, and I think you get the right attitude. It'll get done when it gets done. They're not going to let Matt Ryan walk. That's just absurd.
I'm also curious. We got a couple of questions from our listeners, and a couple of them are dealing with the tight end position. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the tight ends in this draft class, and maybe who do you think is the top guy that will be drafted, or who is the best guy in this class?
Well, I think there's 4 or 5 of them that are serviceable, first team starter type tight ends. I think Hayden, the kid out of South Carolina there, I think he's probably the top guy. I know some people have gone back and forth on that. I think he's a guy that's well rounded, and that's the challenge in the modern NFL is finding guys that are that can do more than one thing. If you're a one-trick pony, you're just not going to make it long in the league because roster limits and roster sizes being what they are, you simply can't carry a guy who can only do one thing unless they're a quarterback. So I think that I think there's 3 or 4 of them. I think the South Dakota State kid's all right. I think the South Carolina kid, Jasecki out of Penn State. There's a couple of these guys that I certainly wouldn't mind. I certainly wouldn't mind on my team.
Okay. Well, Ben, I don't have much else to ask you. I think we've been through it, looking at the top of the draft. I guess the last question I'll ask you, if you were putting money down today, and I'm looking for gambling tips, are quarterbacks going to go 1, 2, 3, and 4 in this draft?
That really hinges on 2 things. It hinges on the Giants, and it hinges on somebody trading up either with the Giants or the Browns. If I were betting that they go 1, 2, 3, 4, depends on the odds they gave me, but I would kind of lean that way. I think obviously Denver wants the situation to go quarterback 1, 2, 3 because that means that the Browns are probably taking Chubb at 4, and that puts Denver in the driver's seat to either select that 4th quarterback or have the ability to trade with either a Buffalo, and Arizona, Miami, or New England for more picks. So. I would suggest that 3 quarterbacks in the top 4 is probably the safest bet you'll have.
Okay. I will certainly scrounge around to see if I can get some good odds on that bet. Ben, let the people know where they can find you on Twitter, as well as where they can find some of your other projects online.
You can unfollow me at Albright NFL on Twitter. It's a dumpster fire, and I highly recommend that you don't subject yourself to it any more than you have to. You can find me on the NFL Underground television show every Tuesday at 3 Mountain. You can find me at Mile High Sports and Mile High Sports Radio during the week, AM 1340, FM 147 in Denver. And we're working on expanding the television show. We'll have some announcements on that in the coming weeks.
Okay, Ben. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us. And we'll certainly be in touch to see how this draft goes, and maybe if some of these predictions wind up coming true.
Absolutely, guys. Take care.
All right, guys. We got some more mailbag questions. I didn't want to subject Ben to doing Falcon-centric stuff, but we have a few more on deck. And first,
by the way,
okay. If you want to do it, Ben, we can do so.
Yeah, fire away.
All right. Let's see. What's Evan Birchfield asks, do you think the Falcons will better utilize Justin Hardy in 2018?
Well, I think a lot of that's up to Justin more than anything else. He needs to prove he could be the guy and get the faith and the trust of the coaching staff there. When he has that, they'll utilize him better or more, as it were.
Okay. See, Ben, as a warning, our fans, our listeners get very detailed on some of these questions, and we're used to answering them. And I know for you guys, it's not necessarily, details on 3rd string running backs and whatnot. That's how we do on the show. This is a question I think is right up your alley, though. So far, who do you think, which NFL team has won the offseason?
Which team has won the offseason? I think the obvious answer is probably going to be the Los Angeles Rams. Although I would suggest that the Los Angeles Chargers should be mentioned in that breath. And I know people are going to scoff at that and say, what about the Browns, the Bears, and that kind of stuff. The Chargers fill the holes that they have without really accruing any debt and without having to give up any draft picks to do so. I really like the Chargers team this coming season. I would say they're probably a Super Bowl favorite, certainly a favorite to win the AFC West. I know it's going to surprise a lot of people, but I think they're a team that stood pat on what they have. They believe in their core philosophy, and they address the holes that they have, like I said, without giving up too much assets. So I would say the Los Angeles area did very well this offseason.
Okay. What are your thoughts on Jair Alexander as a possible first-round pick specifically for the Falcons?
I don't know that that's their guy. I guess anything's possible. I don't think that that's going to happen. Let's put it that way.
Okay. The Falcons have been another question we got from Evan Birchfield is what do you think the Falcons are doing with working out some of these quarterbacks in recent years? They haven't really seemed to invest in young quarterbacks. Is this something that the Falcons are gearing up for?
Well, it's twofold. One, it kind of gives you the lay of the land and keeps you in touch with the evolving nature of the position, and year to year, it gives you the, kind of perspective as that goes along. The other thing is that not all these guys are going to be long-term starters. Some of these guys that you're interviewing are, to be cast off by their team later, and, well, you may need a backup. So if you've already done your homework a few years earlier and, gotten to know a guy, you may feel comfortable bringing him in and having a connection there, or you may be comfortable scratching a guy off because of something that he did a while back. So it's not just an immediacy thing. There's always that future second, third contract type stuff too.
Okay. Are there any sort of defensive players that you haven't heard people talking about that you think are being underrated in this draft class?
Well, most of the guys that I would say that about are now guys that are either first rounders or borderline first, second rounders. So no, I don't think there's any guy. If you're looking for some obscure name, out there, I don't think so. There's a safety out of Grand Valley State that just ran a 4.40 that I think scouts were really enamored with him. That he hits well and covers well. He's a strong side safety, but I don't think the Falcons are going to be in the market for a strong safety. So.
Okay. We got a question from Maeve2124. He asks, aside from the obvious need at D tackle in round 1, what spots do you think the Falcons take in round 2 and 3? Todd McShay has the Falcons taking a D tackle, a wide receiver, and a linebacker with those first 3 picks.
I would say those are the big 3 needs. I'm not usually the kind of guy who just agrees with Todd McShay, but I would say those are the 3 quote-unquote obvious needs for the Falcons. So I would say that it's not, it's no secret. I would suggest they look at those positions. If some other player at another position happens to fall right into their lap, they may do like a BPA thing and just take the best player that falls in the lap. I would not be surprised if those were the 3 first position groups they went for first.
Okay. Let's see. Any other ones that aren't super, super nerdy from our fans? Okay, here's one. Aside from the great Jack Crawford, this is an inside joke that you won't get, Ben, but which Falcons player do you think has the best opportunity to take a leap in 2018? That's a question from Evan Birchfield.
Obviously, the answer there is Harry Douglas. No, I'm kidding. Brian Finneran. No, I'm kidding. There's a chance to take a big leap. Oof, that's a good question. I expect to see more production out of the tight end group overall, more balanced production out of the down roster tight ends. So let that be my answer.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good, strong answer. I think Austin Hooper was a guy that a lot of people expected big things out of last season. In certain people's eyes, he didn't live up to that due to a couple of untimely mistakes that led to some interceptions. But I think he had a overall pretty good season for a second-year player. That was a third-round pick, finishing with 50 catches. So I do think he may be a guy that is flying under the radar. Yeah, Ben, I appreciate you staying with me and answering some of these Falcons mailbag questions. Oh, here's another one. Here's one last lob I'll throw up to you. Did you have any thoughts when you saw that Jalen Collins got suspended for the 28th time?
The same thing I always have when somebody gets suspended in the NFL. What an idiot. You have one job. Don't mess it up, and you still, you flub that. So it really bugs me when guys get suspended in the league. You got a support system available to you. You've got all the tools in the world. It really takes a lot. It takes multiple infractions to, for that kind of stuff. So, it really bugs me when that kind of stuff happens. All you got to do is handle your business, and you fail to do it.
Okay. Well, Ben, I appreciate you tuning or you're hanging out again. I'll say it again. It's really, you're doing me a great solid. You answering some of these questions as opposed to me answering some of these. with these mailbag questions. I'm curious, sort of last question before we let you go. What are your expectations for this Falcons team? Are they going to be a team that's going to be right back in the hunt at the top of the NFC going into 2018?
Well, I think so. I think the division is very winnable. I think them and the Saints have to be the favorites. So I think it's a two-horse race. I don't really expect much out of Tampa. I think Carolina's kind of on the decline, and they have been ever since that Super Bowl run. So, I think it's a two-horse race. And, if Atlanta can stay healthy and get the ball to bounce their way a couple of times, I don't see why they wouldn't be in contention at all.
Okay. Who would be your sort of early favorite for the NFC champion this year?
I think everybody's going to have to say Minnesota, or the Rams have to kind of be that. Minnesota, and then Philly, I think, would still be in the mix. So I like what the Rams are doing, I guess, on paper, and Wade Phillips has the ability to deal with a lot of those egos and personalities and all that kind of stuff. I just don't know how it's going to work. If the defense overshadows the offense and how those personalities flourish in life, if they get frustrated, the offense is able to live up to its end again. So, I guess I would say that my favorites would be, Minnesota and Philly. Kind of a boring prediction, I know. But don't look for Green Bay to have a bounce back too if Rodgers can stay healthy.
Okay. Yeah, I think the NFC race is going to be pretty hectic this year. There's a lot of teams vying for that top spot, and pretty much the last couple of years we know it's pretty much anybody's race because no one before the season really was, or I'm sure people in Philadelphia were certainly thinking, but not many people had the Eagles winning the conference last year before the season. Not many people had the Falcons the previous year. Certainly not many people had the Panthers the prior year. So it's certainly an up for grabs conference, and I think that's a testament to how deep and strong it is.
Yeah, I agree. I would say the NFC is stronger than the AFC at this point.
Yes, everybody's competing to lose to the Patriots in the AFC Championship game, pretty much.
It's like LeBron and whatever. Everybody moves to the other conference.
Yeah, pretty much. All right, Ben, I appreciate you hanging out with us and diving deep on these super nerdy Falcon questions. I'm sure that you were able to stretch your Falcon knowledge to the brink, and I appreciate you for doing that.
No problem at all. Take care.
Okay. Now, guys, we got a couple more questions I do want to wrap before we get out of here. Jelani234 asks, thoughts on Lowell Lutule as a late-round prospect for the Falcons? Yeah, Lutule's fine. As a 6th, 7th round guy, I think he makes a lot of sense. He's a guy that came into the season with a lot of buzz, a lot of hype. People thought of him as a 1st, 2nd round sort of talent, younger brother of Star, for those of you that don't know. And he didn't quite live up to that. It was very unproductive. It was probably I know Pro Football Focus, he might have been like their lowest graded D tackle. And so that raised a lot of red flags with people with him. And so now it wouldn't be a total shocker if he went undrafted. But I think if you're going to pull the trigger or take a flyer on a guy in round 6 or round 7, a guy with his sort of talent level, when you see flashes of you, just go. Well, if you want to see his potential, just go watch the bowl game that Utah had this past year. He dominated that game, and so he could be a guy that you could definitely take a flyer on in the late rounds. Let's see. Any other questions? I mean, I guess I'll answer a couple of questions that have been answered for us. Do I think the Falcons will better utilize Justin Hardy in 2018? Maybe. I don't know. It depends on how confident you are that Steve Sarkisian will better utilize anybody in the offense in 2018. And you can probably guess I'm not overly confident about that. I think he will do a better job, but I don't necessarily know it's going to be because he, particularly a guy like Hardy is going to be better utilized. I think if the Falcons want to get the most out of Justin Hardy this year, they're going to have to use him primarily as a slot receiver, a lot more than they have in the last couple of years, where about 35% of his snaps came in the slot. And I do think, that number needs to be closer to 50% maybe. I'm not expecting him to get sort of all of Sanu's slot snaps, but certainly I do think if you want to get the most out of both those guys, and this is part of the issue that the Falcons sort of had when they signed Sanu. One of the reasons why I wasn't a huge fan of the signing, as many of you know, they're both sort of best utilized as slot receivers, and you can only really have one slot receiver unless you're going to play 4 wide receivers every single snap, and that's not something the Falcons do very often. So it kind of marginalizes one, and with Sanu making $32 million and Justin Hardy making like $2 million, it's obviously where the team is going to side in that one situation. Not to suggest that Sanu somehow didn't deserve the opportunity to give, or wasn't deserving of that opportunity to be the starter there, but I do think the Falcons basically took a player like Mohamed Sanu, who's like 15% better than Justin Hardy, and paid him, much more than 15% more in money wise. And so I do wonder if the Falcons are going to try to square peg Justin Hardy as an outside receiver. I think he can be functional in that regard. Same thing, I do think Sanu can be functional in that regard, but as far as being a high level player, I'm not overly optimistic about it, but we'll see what happens. The Evan Birchfield's question about the quarterbacks, the Falcons taking quarterback, I don't have any particular thoughts on that. I think this the Falcons doing their homework on some of these late round quarterbacks. Some of these guys are going to be 6th, 7th round picks, and if one of those guys is there, maybe the Falcons pull the trigger on the quarterback. I don't think they're really in the market to do so, but they could certainly afford to. As far as their skill positions go, they could afford to take a 3rd quarterback or a 6th wide receiver or a 4th tight end or something like that as far as their roster goes. And maybe it's a quarterback, but I don't expect the Falcons to take a quarterback. I think they're just sort of scouting these guys and trying to get some ideas about who's good and who's not, and maybe to prioritize potentially some guys that may go undrafted and potentially bring those guys in the training camp to compete with guys like Schaub and Garrett Grayson. Let's see. Jelani234, this will be the last question. Name some mid-round prospects that would intrigue the Falcons. That's tough. I guess, I don't know if there's... I'm trying to think of guys that we haven't talked a ton about that aren't sort of the same usual suspects that we seem to be talking about, particularly at the D tackle position. A guy that I think would be intriguing, you could argue that maybe he's a poor man's Nathan Shepard, is John Franklin Myers from Stephen F. Austin. He's not as big as Shepard is. He's about 6'4", 285, I think he was at the Combine, but tested really well. Was another one of those guys that played at a lower level of competition, sort of dominated that competition. I don't think this, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to slander Stephen F. Austin, but I think they were a team that was really bad the past couple of years. I think they had like a winless season not too long ago. I could be confusing them with another team, but he's a guy that I think, maybe not as a mid-round guy, but maybe in round 6 or 7, if the Falcons are looking for some possible late round guys that can sort of back up Derek Shelby. Another guy that's in that mold is a guy like Curtis Cothran from Penn State. Tested it real well, just like everybody that went to Penn State this past year. Some mid-round guys. Let's see. Let's look at some wide receivers. Traquan Smith, Darius Fountain. I think both those guys probably go somewhere between round 3 and 6. You got Byron Pringle, the wide receiver from Kansas State. I think he'll probably go somewhere on day 3. Let's see. Javon Wims is another wide receiver that the Falcons have sort of sniffed around from Georgia. He'll probably go somewhere on day 3 as well. Let's see. Let's look at some safeties. I don't have any safeties. I mean, like I have this spreadsheet that has all the basic all-star guys and what they tested well. And so basically, generally speaking, the Falcons take good athletes. Generally speaking, they take guys that played in all-star games. So I'm looking at the list and I'm thinking maybe a Trayvon Henderson out of Hawaii, Troy Apke, another Penn State guy. The interesting thing about Troy Apke is the way he tested and the way he's built as a 6'1", 200-pound safety. he's built more like how the Falcons typically like corners to be built, that those sort of Seahawk corners. So it'll be interesting to see if the Falcons or a team like the Seahawks or any of those other teams that are sort of disciples of that scheme, like the Chargers or not Jackson. I don't think Jacksonville runs that scheme anymore. But it'll be interesting if any of those teams sort of take Apke in the late rounds and try to move him to cornerback, given his athleticism. Yeah, I mean, mid-round guys, there's going to be a bunch of linebackers in the mix. Jannard Avery is a guy that I know the Falcons have shown interest in and certainly meets their athletic requirements. Fred Warner's another guy that they've been interested in. The same, Shaquem Griffin, Dorian O'Daniel. Yeah, so I hope those are some names that sort of suit you, Jelani. I apologize to people if we didn't get to your question today, but having been on trying to sort of steer him around the super, super nerdy aspects. I know, Luez Abraham, you asked me about the coaching hires. I have zero thoughts on the coaching hires. I don't really care about an assistant defensive line coach or a defensive quality coach. That means nothing to me. No offense to those guys. Travis Jones did good work in Seattle, obviously. Aideen Durde is a nice story as a former NFL Europe player that is now turned into an assistant coach now in the NFL. All awesome stuff, but as far as like having actual opinions about guys that I couldn't pick out of a lineup, no, I don't really have any. So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this draft-centric episode. I know we didn't talk as much about the Falcons as we normally do, but I do think this draft is much more intriguing at the top, much more interesting. The Falcons will just wind up taking a D tackle. The Falcons draft well. They'll probably get a good player. It's not a whole lot of, drama involved with the Falcons. So talking to Ben, wanted to get more insightful, dig deep into the drama at the top of the draft. But if you want to ask questions for next week's show, which we expect our good friend Scott Karasik to return for. So if you guys have been hankering for the return of Scott's hot takes, you should get those next week. He's been eagerly waiting, taking a brief hiatus over the last month to recharge the battery, so to speak. But if you want to get those questions in to Scott and myself for next week's show, of course, you can do so using the hashtag Falcons Mailbag. You can tweet at me. I'm at FalcFan. Scott is at Karasik S. Of course, the easiest way to do so is to tweet at the show's handle. That is Falcons PFC. Of course, check us out on ProFootballCentral.com. Check us out under the Pro Football Central account on YouTube. Like it, subscribe. Also check out Scott's account, my account as well on YouTube, where occasionally episodes are posted. If you haven't seen recent episodes, a couple of them are on under my account due to other issues. Of course, you can also check us out on Facebook, Falcon Central Radio on Facebook, and again, give us a like there so you can keep updated with all those things. So we'll be back next week with Scott and more draft talk, diving deep on this Falcons draft.